There was even some controversy over that it may be Goodbye British Rose, because it's more than just England, Scotland, Wales.
Now, I'm going to speculate here a little bit because we're watching the British Broadcasting Corporation's pool pictures. But what you saw leaving Buckingham Palace was not, I think, the Queen, but in fact was Prince Philip, and that the Queen and Prince Philip may be going separately to Westminster Abbey, and that small group of people there arriving on the Mall, I think, Andrew Morton, in the neighborhood of Clarence House and St. James's Palace, is a representative group of people who will join the procession and be able to signify to the world all of the various constituencies which felt they got so much hope from Diana: the AIDS community, the crippled community, the landmine community, the homeless community.
Absolutely, and in fact, there was one charity, Aspire, which is for people with artificial limbs. They were going to send their officials, but there was a protest from within, and it's all people in wheelchairs now who are going along. And this, again, takes away from any kind of semblance of military ceremonial with the gun carriage. This is really back to what Diana would have wanted, the people that she cared for, that she wanted, people who are, in a way, disenfranchised from mainstream life.
Andrew, she even went to places that no one would think of going. She went to every hospital for the criminally insane, didn't she, I understand? And she watched operations. She watched open heart surgery. She went to places that were, you know, not the common places that one would go in order to do good works.
She went, for example, you're quite right, Barbara, she went to the Bullring, which is a place quite near here where all the homeless doss out. And there was a potential security risk, but she was prepared to do that. And it's because it comes from the heart. She saw herself as an outsider inside the royal family, and she naturally gravitates to the outsiders in our own community. And I think this is one of the most significant aspects of her life, and one of the most significant aspects of those people who came to pay homage to her at Kensington Palace. It wasn't the great and the good, it was ordinary people, people who don't necessarily have a voice, either in the mass media or in normal institutions.
Of all the people we've spoken to and we've spoken to so many people since she was killed, one who impressed me above others was Baroness Margaret Jay, who we knew in the United States when she was at one point the wife of the British ambassador, but she became the first chairman of the AIDS Trust in Britain. At a time when so many people in the world were terrified of AIDS, and she was telling us on the air the other night that we have to think back to how frightened we were that AIDS was communicable in a variety of ways, which we've subsequently learned to be nonsensical. But that when Diana reached out to touch an AIDS patient here in Britain for the first time, it was practically revolutionary.
It was a baby. Didn't she reach out for a baby?
I was there. It was at Middlesex Hospital in 1987. It was a very moving moment. She just simply shook somebody's hand who had AIDS. It was something that the palace themselves were very nervous about her doing. They didn't want her to get into something which was then totally associated with the homosexual community, and they felt that it was inappropriate for her. She defied them, and it was one of the events in her life which set her in motion towards actually finding herself as an individual. It's an interesting psychological point as well.
Is it true, Andrew, as I've heard, that there was a serious debate in the palace establishment as to whether she would touch somebody on that occasion?
Oh, yes, indeed. I mean, they were talking about whether she should wear gloves or whether she shouldn't wear gloves. The whole atmosphere at that time was very hostile to Diana doing it, and she was very courageous to do that.
When you go to Kensington Palace and you see flowers, many of them have letters and signs saying, "This is from gay people. Thank you, Princess Diana." I mean, they felt very close to her. She also touched people who were victims of leprosy, and that's also
Constitution Arch, under which they have just come, another unique moment for people in these islands who watch such things carefully. It is normally only the monarch that passes under Constitution Arch. And they are now on the very edges now of Buckingham Palace, and we'll turn now southeast, if geography serves me correctly, and go down Constitution Hill. Here is Tony Blair and Mrs. Blair. He has played a very significant role in the country this week in a variety of ways. He was first the one who went out and referred to Diana at the beginning of the week as the People's Princess, making it clear in a great many minds here that the people could rally around her and should rally around her. In some respects, it could be argued he contributed to the division that was so clear this week between the people and the royal family. But on a couple of occasions, subsequently, he has been the first person to get out and defend the royal family for staying in seclusion at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, keeping the boys in seclusion, supporting the notion of the Queen speaking to the people. Perhaps, this is speculation, informed speculation perhaps, having something to say about what the Queen said to the nation yesterday. But he is certainly the face of what is called New Labour in this country, very often compared to President Clinton. Been to Washington several times now to talk to the president and political campaigns in Britain, now very much more American than they have been in the past.
The Queen discussed her speech, actually, with the Prime Minister. There's Henry Kissinger. He is here with his wife. Princess Diana was very, very fond of him. They had a kind of, they used to gossip. He described her as having a wicked sense of humor. He presented an award to her when she was in America last year, when she was at a charity for cerebral palsy, and they felt close to each other.
Richard Attenborough, the great actor who taught Diana how important it was to be a public speaker, and who writes in today's Times a very, very glowing article about their relationship. Andrew?
Well, more than that, he was the one who really encouraged her to become involved in the landmines campaign. Really, he saw her quite a lot at Kensington Palace, and he was the one who actually made a film about landmines, which finally changed her mind that it was something that she must do. And it gave her this real new vitality and sense of direction. She owed a lot to him during her life, and
gave him a sense of new vitality, too.
I think so.
Yeah.
Peter, going back to the Prime Minister, I spoke to one of his, I'll pause now and I'll come back and tell you this later.
Her Majesty, I think that's Prince Edward on her left, and I'm not sure if Andrew's there as well, but Her Majesty walking out through the front courtyard of Buckingham Palace. We'll try to tell you all who is there. Everybody will be here to the best of our knowledge.
The Queen is 71, the Duke of Edinburgh is 76. There was some suggestion that in 2002, when she celebrates her 50th year of reigning here, that she would begin to turn some of her official duties over to Prince Charles.
We'll have to have a closer look to see, but the people who are expected are Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, who is one of the members of the royal family who works terribly hard and doesn't get as much credit as some others think she should.
Her son, Peter Phillips, has been very close to the two young princes. He's been with them all this weekend. He's 19 years old. He accompanied them on the plane. He was with them yesterday at Kensington Palace. Princess Anne's son is probably their closest relative near their age.
But the royal family has made it very clear that on this occasion they do not wish to be the focus of attention. You will notice, if you stay with us, that when the service begins in Westminster Abbey, there will be no pictures of the royal family inside the Abbey.
Or the Spencer family.
A reminder of how, to what length some of the tabloid newspapers here will go. The Royal National Institute for the Deaf made it very clear the day before yesterday that they would not provide lip readers to the tabloid press so that they could understand what the royal family was saying to themselves. Cynthia McFadden?
Happening apparently here at Buckingham Palace is the royal family has come out of the palace gates and is standing on the side where the cortege is momentarily to pass. It's our understanding that they are going to watch the cortege pass and then get into the cars and go to Westminster. As the royal family walked out of the gates, I don't know if you could hear it, I know you could see it, but there was applause throughout the crowd. The crowd has grown exponentially in the last hour. There is no room for movement here now. The people simply pack one upon the other. And the royal family is simply standing outside the gates, waiting for the coffin of Diana to be rolled by.
In fairness to Her Majesty the Queen, it is the Queen who invented what is called the walkabout, at which Diana became so famous, and other members of the royal family have tried with, in some cases, success, and without success in others. But Her Majesty, who this week, that's Princess Margaret on her right, the Queen's sister, her own tragic figure for many years, who was, and behind her, Viscount Linley, or is that Lord Snowdon? That's David Viscount Linley behind her, who's the son of Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret was married to Lord Snowdon, a world-famous photographer, among other things, and David Viscount Linley, her son, who's 12th in order of succession to the throne, among other things, an accomplished furniture maker who not long ago had a show in the United States. And I do think that is Anne, the Princess Royal, just to the left of the Queen.
Also divorced and remarried, as is Princess Margaret, who you mentioned her rather tragic life. She was in love in the 50s with Group Captain Peter Townsend. Many of us remember this, and that affair was broken up because he had been divorced.
It was 1992 in which Her Majesty the Queen referred to it as her horrible year, annus horribilis. In Latin, she said at the time of her annual address, but that was the year in which the young members of the royal family began to fall apart left, right, and center. And for those members of the older generation who have gotten out of their beds around the world today, certainly around the United States, there is already an ensconced sense of sadness that, I think that's Mrs. Shan Kidd.
That's Frances Shan Kidd.
Frances Shan Kidd, who is Diana's
her mother.
And would have been grandmother to the future king. A very sad figure in Diana's life. Walked out on Diana and her father when Diana was very young. I think it is in your book, yes, Mr. Morton, in which Diana hears her mother's footsteps going down the gravel pathway for the last time.
Yes, this is at Park House, where they lived next door to Sandringham when Diana was just 6 years old. And it's one of her first memories, is that her mother leaving, walking down out into her car and out of her life, what she thought of was forever. Mrs. Shan Kidd always resented the idea that she was the bolter in the family. She always envisaged having due access to the children. This was denied in an extraordinarily bitter court case, where her own mother, Lady Fermoy, actually testified against her. Such was the depth of bitterness in her family. And that legacy obviously affected not just Diana, but all the rest of the children, Charles, Jane and Sarah.
This has been a banner week for psychiatric examination, both here and at home, because the royal family and the Spencer family have had such troubles, and certainly such public troubles, that the difficulties which the children have suffered, I speak here particularly of Diana and Charles, has not come as any great surprise to people. Another example of how this is being shared around the world by television, that's the Sky Dome in Toronto, the great baseball stadium in Toronto with its open and closed roof, and it's 5 o'clock, 5:15 in the morning there, and people in former Dominion still, certainly member of the Commonwealth, former member of the British Empire, getting up to watch this and participate in what has been, let's be fair, an international soap opera for many years. And Times Square in Hong Kong, again, where it is later, people watching this as well, and all across the United States. And I'm mindful of the fact, of course, that this is Saturday morning, and that even at this early hour, or perhaps at this early hour only in some parts of America, children are watching the television set. What you are, of course, watching is the funeral for a young woman, only 36, who was, for people of your age and people of all ages, very much a fairy princess. And she died in a car accident a week ago in Paris with a friend. And though I doubt if you have all watched as much news television as we have this week, those of you who are young, we have watched her life story played out on television this week. And now that is her coffin, buried in the flag, which is actually the monarch's flag, or the Queen's flag in this case, being moved very slowly, accompanied by soldiers, through the streets of London, the capital city of Britain, to the most famous church in all the British, and certainly one of the most famous churches in all the world, Westminster Abbey, where there will be a very unusual ceremony to celebrate her departure. In that Westminster Abbey, we think one of the people about to arrive is Mrs. Clinton, who has come here to represent the United States, also come to represent the first family of the United States. The president intended to get up early and watch television, still on vacation. Barbara pointed out earlier that Mrs. Clinton and Diana were not particularly close friends, but very engaged they became, Barbara, on a couple of recent trips that Diana paid to Washington.
Yes, and I think that there was a sort of simpatico, because Mrs. Clinton has also had her own problems and her own travail. Peter, you know, one of the things that people feel, and you look at the family, and you see now the Queen and Princess Margaret, is that finally, in the last few weeks, Princess Diana was happy. Everybody keeps talking about that. And when you go and you see the floral bouquets, as we have, there are many of them that say Diana and Dodi are together at last, together in heaven. There doesn't seem to be any resentment that, you know, that she died in this speeding car, but rather that at last she found happiness. This was the first relationship she'd had, really since her marriage, that she could be public about. Whether she was going to marry him, whether she wasn't going to marry him, sort of depends on who you talk to. Her closest friends say no, he hadn't proposed. She would never have done anything without talking to her son.
Right in front of Buckingham Palace, the Queen bows her head. And I want to bring back in again Sarah Bradford. Sarah, you've one of the Queen's biographers. Try to help us understand what you think Her Majesty is going through this week.
Well, I think immense sadness. I think regret at what has happened in the past. I think tremendous concern for William and Harry, who are, after all, the future of the monarchy, and who have been through the most difficult time over the past years, seeing their parents publicly disagreeing, having bitter fights, and finally divorcing. And now, just when things were perhaps getting more normal, this terrible thing happens for them. And so the Queen, as the head of the family, bears the major responsibility for them. And I think as she saw Diana's coffin pass, all these things went through her mind, all many regrets for the past. And as she said, there was Diana, a warm, affectionate, smiling, exceptional person.
Do you believe that the Queen will also feel a sense of guilt at the manner in which her own son has been raised, and the cloistered way in which the crown has existed for so long, and especially now that she sees the public response to the public nature of Diana?
Well, I think that in every family, when things like that go wrong, the parents do, or indeed should, question what part they've had to play in it. And when these first things became public, the divorces, the Queen turned to one of her closest friends and said, "What did we do wrong?" So she's certainly not above thinking that way. And of course, I'm afraid that there has been some responsibility there in the lack of communication between the different generations, which Diana was hoping to bridge when she married Prince Charles.
We will have lots of time as the day continues to talk about the future of the royal family, but you hear the first scale of the pipes now. As pipers join this funeral procession, let us listen. people in the world who think it is not a sympathetic sound, but every day of her life, Her Majesty the Queen is awakened when she's at Buckingham Palace by a piper underneath her bedroom window in the West Garden. Anthony Holden, I don't want to detract from the sense of occasion at all. I don't think any of us do, but I have been struck this week, perhaps by the good taste of all of you who've done commentary in this country, but the reluctance or perhaps decision not to discuss what might call the sort of more reckless or darker side of Diana. I've heard people refer to her in the last several days as now Saint Diana. Is it your impression that this is how she will now remain, or will you in Britain now discuss her in a fuller way when she's buried?
Peter, I think it's become clear this week that Diana was loved as much for her faults and imperfections as for her evident strengths and qualities. I think the reason so many people have fellow feeling is that she didn't hide it when she had a lapse of self-confidence. Her gaffes were all too public. It's what made her so human. And I think you were talking a minute ago about whether the Queen was feeling guilty about the way she brought up her son. I think the Queen's feeling anything like that today. It might well be regret at the rather brutal way the royal family treated Diana just a year ago last week, the week before she died, when they stripped her of her rank of Royal Highness. They formally expelled her from the ranks of the family, and they deleted her name from the prayers said for the royal family in churches throughout Christendom. Diana was very hurt. It was part of the divorce settlement, but many people at the time said that the royal family had gone too far, and that certainly has been on the lips of many people this week.
Thank you, Tony.
It was always...
Sorry, I had to cut you off there for just a moment, just so I can perhaps help to identify for our younger people Prince Charles coming out. You're looking at the Victoria Monument just outside Buckingham Palace, and this is the beginning of the Mall. The hearse, rather the gun carriage, has just moved in front of Buckingham Palace and is now going north along the Mall, past St. James's Palace. And there waiting for her, Prince Charles. To his left, as you can see, Prince William, and to Prince Charles's right, Prince Harry, the two people she loved most in the world, her sons, who, because they are princes in the House of Windsor, must, even if they did not want to, must participate in the very public farewell to their mother.
Peter, on the wreath, the very first wreath that is on the top of her coffin, the card says, Mummy, put there by her two boys.
There's been a great deal of discussion this week about whether young Prince William, particularly, who is 15 and something of an idol with teenagers here, will walk behind his mother's coffin, whether her former husband, Prince Charles, will walk, whether Harry will. And earlier in the week, when there was such tension here, such distance between the royal family and the general public, it was thought that it might even be risky for Prince Charles to walk, lest he be booed. He is widely seen here as having treated her coldly in marriage. I think everybody acknowledges that marriages take two, but certainly as this relationship has been portrayed in your book, Mr. Morton, but on a more daily basis in the tabloid press, she at this week is certainly seen to be victim as much as anything.
At the same time, I think there's a growing mood that Prince Charles himself is a victim of his own background, and that the fact that this is contributing to this change in mood from one of anger to one of reconciliation. The fact that Prince Charles now needs support and sympathy from people whatever his faults in the past, as much as Diana does, and Diana's family.
You know, there has been no mention at all of Camilla Parker Bowles, and this now puts her in a terribly difficult position, and Charles, because if there is considered a villain, perhaps it is she. She is the one who, it seems, broke up the marriage, although intimates have said that she wasn't the cause, but she was the consequence. And now I think, and I don't know what you feel, Andrew, that it would be extremely difficult for him to continue that relationship. What does he do? Just as he needs the support most of this woman as his best friend, he can't be seen publicly with her anymore. It's a very untenable position.
Let me first explain to some of our younger viewers who Camilla Parker Bowles is. She's a longtime friend of Prince Charles for many, many years. And when Princess Diana's marriage to Prince Charles was coming apart, Princess Diana gave a very famous interview to the British Broadcasting Corporation here, in which she said there was a third woman in her marriage from the very beginning, and that was Prince Charles' friend, Lady Camilla Bowles, who was in fact married to a friend of Prince Charles. When the marriage broke up, Prince Charles, who acknowledged that he'd had a relationship during his marriage with Camilla Bowles, has certainly been comforted by her and been a long-time friend. She has not been seen in public. She was going to be seen in public this week had Diana not died. She has never met the boys, but I think, as you point out, Barbara, is out of the picture significantly for the moment. We'll come back to that if we may, Andrew.
Indeed.
She has acted with great sensitivity, though, certainly in the last week. And by the way, Peter, that famous interview, which you talked about, which was done by the BBC, and it was an excellent and very revealing interview, I learned yesterday that it had all been rehearsed and that the questions had all been planned in advance, so that Princess Diana did indeed know everything she was going to say.
And there is your answer. Prince Charles and his two sons.
This is the moment that people have been, if not looking forward to, but looking forward to with some dread in their hearts, really. The fact that seeing this young boy, Prince William, the man who will carry the burdens of monarchy into the 21st century, following his mother. People knew of the bond between William and Diana. They'd seen the way that he was comforting her in her difficult times.
Yes.
And I think these are the poignant scenes which will now resound down the decades of history.
This is the Mall, which leads from Buckingham Palace up to Trafalgar Square. This procession will not go all the way up the Mall. But you know, Andrew, I don't think that people really should be surprised. Aside from the fact that Prince William is sometimes described as his mother's closest confidant. This is what royal children are obliged to do. They are obliged to live in the public eye from the time they're very young. I keep thinking of young John Kennedy at his father's funeral, Prince Charles and Princess Anne from a very young age, certainly not with any of the intensity that has been forced on the royal family today, but were expected to be there for public occasions, happy and sad.
You're absolutely right, Peter. In fact, in the old days, there was no such thing as a private life for a monarch. The whole idea of the Privy Councillor, which is a great office of state, was because the individual had access to the king's privy. So the sense that the royal family live their lives out in public, share their emotions in public, and hide their emotions is one of the reasons why that we see this dichotomy, this difference between the royal family and their reaction to Diana's death and the rest of the country. The fact that they've got to shield themselves from so much public grief, an expression of public grief.
Yesterday, to see Prince William and Prince Harry, the way they handled themselves, even smiling and reaching out with such enormous dignity. He's a very popular young prince. You mentioned, Peter, how popular he is with young people, but he's greatly loved, and if anything will keep the monarchy in this country going, it is the affection for Prince William and the hope that, you know, one day he will be king.
And now you see what, of course, we should describe as Diana's procession, both during her marriage and after her marriage. Though after her marriage, she gave up a great many of the charities that a member of the royal family is obliged to participate in. But she gave up that, but stayed concentrated with a handful, and many of them are represented today. And they give you a clue to her character. The Arts Council. One time Diana was called the rock and roll princess, but she has extended her interest to art and fashion, as we all know, on a universal basis. The British Deaf Association, 10 members in the Abbey today, 5 in the procession are represented. The British Lung Foundation and the British Red Cross and the British Sports Association for the Disabled, and a summer music festival at Chester in the county of Cheshire, and the Child Accident Prevention Trust, and the City Ballet, and the College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow, the Douglas Bader Foundation. Douglas Bader, a very famous World War II pilot who lost his legs and went on to become every bit as famous and mobile as anybody else on his artificial legs.
And
The hat makes it difficult, but I think on the left that is Lady Sarah McCorquodale, if I'm not. We may well make mistakes here, but on the right.
On the right, I think, and on the left is Jane.
On the right, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's eldest sister. She's 42, a lady-in-waiting to her sister. On the left, Ian Francis Kidd, Diana's mother. And on the left, Lady Jane Fellows, who's 40, Diana's older sister, married to Sir Robert Fellows, who is the Queen's private secretary.
I noticed that Diana's mother, Frances Shan Kidd, has a very glorious cross on her, and she recently converted to Roman Catholicism.
And has spent her last years in really somewhat secluded. She wrote a letter to the press, she wrote a handwritten letter in which she said how much she loved her daughter and thanked God for giving her the daughter and for now taking Princess Diana back to him.
Mrs. Shan Kidd now lives on a rather remote island off the west coast of Scotland, and she came down to this today, slightly, she said, reluctantly, to leave a party in the local Catholic parish church this evening, where the parish priest tells us she is now very much involved. It is said that Diana and she were in reasonably close contact in recent years. Diana has never been to see her mother on this remote island, and Andrew, I think he would be pushing it to say they had a close relationship with her.
They had a very up and down relationship. Often Diana would be spending more time comforting her than vice versa. I remember when Diana was on the cusp of leaving public life in 1993, before she made her famous time and space speech. Her mother was on the phone with her various problems. I think we're now seeing...
Who is that between... No, that's the Earl. That's Earl Spencer.
On the right is Prince Charles. In the centre is Prince Harry. On the left is Earl Spencer, Charles Spencer, Diana's brother. And the far left is William.
Earl Spencer, where you at home may be fairly familiar, and then Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, on the extreme right there. Earl Spencer, who now lives in South Africa, is the one who earlier this week in his first public comments referred to the editors of the British tabloid press primarily as having blood on their hands and having contributed to the death of his sister in that car accident in Paris. The investigation in Paris goes on with relentless intensity, and a great many people, including, that's the Queen Mother, that's the 97 years old Queen Mother who lives at Clarence House there on the Mall, or on the Mall. They've just, on the Royal Mall has just passed her house. It was from her home that Diana left to go to be married 16 years ago. She is the most extraordinarily enduring member of the royal family, often described as the most popular member of the royal family, certainly for that generation. Slightly seen as a genteel, doddering aunt. Is that a little unkind? Andrew?
I think that certainly as far as Diana was concerned, she never particularly got on very well with the Queen Mother, because the Queen Mother was a great friend of Lady Ruth Fermoy, her grandmother, who was so much against Diana's mother. And she always used to say that Clarence House was the font of all criticism of Diana inside the royal family. I think the Queen Mother does come from a different age. It does come from an Edwardian age where you never complained, you never explained, and you just got on with it.
Have other relationships, and you never, ever, ever contemplated divorce.
Never. No, not at all. And the fact that all the Queen's children have divorced.
Well, except for the youngest son.
Well, he's not yet married.
He's not yet married.
Prince Edward is not yet, although he's taking his time about it. He's been romancing a young lady called Sophie Rhys-Jones for the last 4 years.
She's an executive, I think, at a public relations firm, and she's here today with him, I think. Yeah. It must take enormous stamina to be seen with a member of the young royals today over any lengthy period of time, given the attention we in the press have given this family. But the Queen Mother, for her generation, in some respects, had something of the same public demeanor as Diana. It was during the war when she and her husband, King George VI, refused to move out of Buckingham Palace when Britain was under siege by German bombers. Buckingham Palace was bombed during the war, and when the east end of London was so terribly bombed, she and her husband would walk among the people. And so she, this Scottish member of the Scottish nobility, endeared herself to a generation in much the same way that Diana has endeared herself to a younger generation.
Yes, I think that's a very good point, because when she first came into the royal family, she was seen as an outsider. It was one of the first occasions that a member of the royal family had married a commoner, albeit a well-born commoner, and she was called Cookie by the late Duchess of Windsor, because she was seen to be rather lowly born. And yet the Queen Mother, who in a way reinvented the royal family, just as Diana in the 80s reinvented the royal family. The Queen Mother made the royal family far more accessible than it had been, certainly during the Edwardian and very much so during the Victorian period.
I want to do a quick canvass here, if I may. I'd like to ask, first of all, Tony Holan, and then Sarah Bradford, and then you, Andrew Morton, to give us just a very, very quick thumbnail sketch of how you think Prince Charles will now be portrayed, given the way he has performed historically, but also in the last couple of days. Tony Holden, may I start with you as we watch Prince Charles follow his ex-wife's casket?
Prince Charles's popularity was at a pretty low ebb before any of this happened. I think there's a degree of sympathy to him, of course, as the father of these two poor boys without a mother, and there's hope that he can somehow shed the coldness of his upbringing and turn much more into a tactile, warm father than perhaps he's been to them so far. He's only spent 30 days with them in the last 12 months. It's very interesting to me watching these pictures, the positioning, the way that Earl Spencer and his brother's in the middle there, and Charles is marginalized like his father. I think that's as it should be symbolically. William's the only hope for the future. William's the only hope for the monarchy's future, and Charles's only hope of survival really as a public figure now is as William's father.
Well, I did anticipate from you, Tony Holden, a quite severe observation. Sarah Bradford, do you feel the same way?
No, I don't entirely feel the same way. I think it's early days to see how the public are going to view Prince Charles after all this has gone on. How far they will blame him for the unhappiness that Diana suffered, or how far they will feel sympathy for him as the lone parent of these two young boys. And certainly the images over the past few days have been very sympathetic of Prince Charles hand in hand in public with his son. This is hitherto not a royal characteristic. And so I think that we shouldn't make too much of a snap judgment of him.
Andrew Morton, from you, a sort of brief analysis of Prince Charles' future.
I think Prince Charles' future is very uncertain. His popularity was very low anyway. There was still endless discussion about his relationship with his friend Camilla Parker Bowles. The death of the Princess of Wales has cast a further shadow over that popularity. Yes, he'll become king, but it will be very much a holding operation until Prince William. He is the future of the royal family.
Barbara, when you and I were here, I know exactly what we're doing here in terms of... Hang on just a second. Let's go to the front of Westminster Abbey. I believe that may well be the Queen or the Queen Mother, if we could go to the front door of Westminster Abbey. Well, we can't tell, but whoever it was got applause, or perhaps the applause was merely for the royal standard on top of one of the royal family's many Rolls-Royces as it arrives at the west door of Westminster Abbey. We get a better sense when they go in. But as they come here through Horse Guards Parade, they've now turned off the Mall, and they're coming through what is called Horse Guards Parade on their way to Whitehall itself. This is also familiar to many Americans. This is the scene of Whitehall Palace. This is where Henry VII in the 1600s held these great jousts and tournaments, but it is here on the Queen's birthday where the members of the household regiments ride and march in review. The Queen often appears on horseback herself, and for those of you who've been tourists in London, especially you kids, this is maybe where you've come and you've seen one of the guards sitting on a horse and you've tried to talk to him and he didn't say anything to you. Which is always frustrating for young visitors to London when they get nothing back from the guards outside any of the royal palaces here. But this is Horse Guards Parade as they go through the very same place where other funeral processions have formed up, not very far from the offices of the War Room, from which the late great Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the great British wartime leader, ran the affairs of the war from underground. This is a core bit of this national capital, which is rich, eminently rich in the nation's history. Barbara.
Peter, I'd like to follow up just a little bit when you were talking with Andrew Holden and Andrew Morton. You know, Princess Diana, when she did that interview now 2 years ago, said at the time that she didn't think that Prince Charles, she said in effect she didn't think that he would really be the best king, that she hoped that his son implied that she hoped that Prince William would be king. Now there is a magazine article just out in New York that in which she supposedly, we will never know, had said that he shouldn't be king, Prince Charles, because he is a follower and not a leader. So to some degree, don't you think, Anthony, that she has put down his reputation, perhaps not meaning to, perhaps out of love for her son?
She's never, ever believed that Prince Charles will become king. She said, actually, for the...
Excuse me again for interrupting, but Her Majesty has left Buckingham Palace. Perhaps that applause you hear is for the sudden appearance of the national flag, the Union flag, or Union Jack as we most commonly know it, flying at half-staff over Buckingham Palace. This, in this country, and throughout the British Commonwealth certainly, will be taken as enormously significant. Sorry, Andrew, continue.
Yes, this has been a consistent theme of Diana's life over the last 10 years. She's never believed that Prince Charles will become king, and she's never believed that herself will become queen, albeit not in these circumstances. She's always seen the hope for the royal family as being Prince William, which is why she's invested so much of her own time and so much of her own emotional energy in Prince William, in taking him to see down and out, in taking him to see the homeless, in taking him to see aged patients. She wants him to have a rounded view of what life is really like inside Britain today, so that when he becomes king, as she always believed he would, and keep the standard raised of monarchy for the 21st century, then at least he will be in touch with the people. And that's what she always felt about the royal family. They're not in touch with their emotions, they're not in touch with the people.
In case you are just arriving at anywhere in the United States, thank you for joining us on ABC. We are here in London covering the funeral of Diana, the Princess of Wales, and we are not too very long from the actual funeral service itself in the 1,000-year-old Westminster Abbey. From around the city and around the country and around the world, royals and commoners, friends and officials of Diana, who was killed last Saturday, are gathering on the Abbey to celebrate her life. Coming through Horse Guards Parade, not terribly far now from Whitehall, which is not very far from Westminster Abbey itself, her coffin on a gun carriage, accompanied by members of the Welsh Guard and the King's Troop of the Household Cavalry, and accompanying her as she moves, her ex-husband, Prince Charles, her two sons, William and Harry, Earl Spencer, her brother, and the Queen's sister, I beg your pardon, the Queen's husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. Other members of the royal family and the Spencer family have already gathered in Westminster Abbey. The First Lady, Mrs. Clinton, I think, has arrived with the British ambassador, Admiral William Crowe. Various members of what is described by the Royal Palace here as Diana's celebrity friends are here. The news services are saying that Tom Hanks is here, Diana Ross, Tom Cruise and his wife, Nicole Kidman, and Steven Spielberg is said to be here as well. But much more important to this day than any of the individuals who are here is the vast display of public sentiment on the streets today, as it has been for the entire week, for this 36-year-old, astonishingly glamorous human being who was killed in, to use that dreadful cliche, the prime of her life. Her Majesty the Queen, who came out and stood outside the front gates of Buckingham Palace while the gun carriage passed, and then got in the car and came the short distance here to Westminster Abbey with the Queen Mother, that is to say Queen Elizabeth's mother, Queen Elizabeth, who's 97 years old, being led in where they'll be greeted by the Dean of Westminster and perhaps by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the leading figures of the Anglican Church, of which the Queen is the secular head in Britain. This abbey is, some of you undoubtedly have visited it, eats with history.
This, however, will be a service unlike any that's been held here before, where you have Elton John singing, where you have poetry that's going to be read by Princess Diana's two sisters. The Prime Minister will read, Prime Minister Blair will read from the Bible and speak of love. Princess Diana's favorite hymns will be played. There has never been a service like this. It's been called a unique service for a unique person, and it will be. So, you know, Peter, when you and I covered, as did many broadcasters, the wedding, one knew in advance what it was going to be. It was a traditional ceremony. This is unlike anything before.
Well, never before, Barbara, as you know, did we ever think we should be here 16 years ago when we sat on we're on a tiny balcony overlooking Westminster Abbey today. 16 years ago, we sat on an even tinier balcony outside St. Paul's Cathedral in the city of London, and were in those days stunned by the joy and celebration of that day. A day much like this. The British have been lucky with their weather, if that's an apt way to put it today. But it has enabled a great many people to come. Scotland Yard tells us just a minute ago that 1 million people have been here on the streets today to watch the gun carriage go through. And again, if you're just joining us, this funeral procession has taken much longer than originally intended because it was felt by the Spencer family and by the royal family and certainly by the government that more people should have an opportunity to see Princess Diana one last time. When this ceremony is over, she'll travel almost 80 miles by car to the scene of her family home in the county of Northamptonshire, about 80 miles from here. But on this particular voyage through Hyde Park, past Buckingham Palace, through the historic Horse Guards Parade, and then down Whitehall towards the British Parliament, this has been the heart of empire for so long, and this young woman has done so much to change what was for so long its core establishment.
I was going to point out, sometimes it's difficult for you and me to hear each other if it sounds as if we're interrupting. I was just going to point out that royal business goes on as usual. This is the weekend that the Prime Minister of Great Britain goes and visits Balmoral to stay with the Queen, and when this service is over, he is indeed going to do that. So the certain traditions, certain things never change.
Just watch this very quietly for a moment and perhaps ask first Cynthia McFadden and then Aaron Brown to give us quietly their assessment of what the reaction has been of the people as we go along. Cynthia?
You know, Peter, here at the palace has been extraordinary. What's happened in the last 15 or 20 minutes. When the cortege passed initially, it was absolutely still. People 20 deep, 30 deep in some places, almost 50 deep in other places, stood absolutely silently. There was a small group, a stream of people that has apparently followed the cortege the entire length and have been winding behind. And in some of the photographs, you've been able to see them. But I think perhaps there was polite applause when the Queen came out and watched the cortege pass. But the most extraordinary moment for me was when the standard was lowered and the Union Jack was raised. The applause was deafening and spontaneous, and people stood in place and stared at that flag for probably 5 or 10 minutes without moving. It has been a remarkable sight here this morning.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'll speculate that when we hear these smatterings of applause for such gestures, it is because we are seeing the royal family doing what the people have wanted them to do all week, which is to respond to the public need for the royal family to share this in the same manner in which so much of the public has shared. It's been very difficult for members of some generations in Britain this week to comprehend what is going on. A member of the older generation was heard to say here earlier this week that his generation was, brought up and trained to fight Hitler, and that it was difficult to understand a generation when all it took was love to pick up on the great Beatles song and the Rock and Roll Princess. But over the several days since Diana was killed, even those people here and around the world who at first were stunned by the reaction and uncertain about the reaction have come to understand that what is being seen here has enormous meaning in many ways, about celebrity, about monarchy in the 20th and eve of the 21st century, and certainly about the press and about television. There are people here, as there are at home, who believe that our participation in this and the extent to which we have covered it has simply given it a renewed adrenaline at almost every minute. But in London today, this tradition of modern and traditional is inescapably real. Aaron Brown. Let us go to the front of the west door of Westminster Abbey now, because Diana's coffin has arrived, and here in the tight confines in the shadow of St. Margaret's Church, to the left of the Abbey there is absolute silence. 28 minutes after 11 on Saturday morning, on the balconies of the Grace and Favorite Apartments, the government buildings here, people stand absolutely silent, almost all of them in dark clothes, as the gun carriage draws very gently to a halt in front of the west door. The bearers from the Welsh Guards. She is the Princess of Wales. This regiment of foot guards, raised in 1915 by the order of His Majesty King George V, so that Wales would be included in the national complement of the regiments of foot guards identified with the countries and the various counties of the United Kingdom. It was only 2 days after they were formed that they mounted a guard at Buckingham Palace, St. David's Day in Wales. And now these men who most recently have seen service in Northern Ireland and the Falklands and ceremonial duty in Hong Kong will carry this most beloved, controversial, talented and tortured princess into the great nave of Westminster Abbey. All are here. The Queen Mother, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, Diana's family, her mother, her stepmother, her 2 sisters, her brother, her friends, from, it is fair to say, all walks of life, the royal and the common, the celebrated and the underprivileged. Those are the muffled bells of Westminster itself. service will be conducted by the very Reverend Wesley Carr, who is the Dean of Westminster. He's been the Dean only since last February. It's the biggest thing, he says, I have ever done. But it is, he points out, a rare opportunity for the Abbey to bring together the pageantry, the royal history, and the common touch. In the ceremony, we will not see members of the royal family or members of the Spencer family at their request. Just to repeat that members of the royal family will not be seen during this ceremony, and nor, I suspect, will members of the Spencer family, other than the manner in which they may participate in the service, namely Her Majesty and the Duke of Edinburgh there placing a wreath. And now the boys and Prince Charles placing a wreath. This is intended to be a service which would have pleased Diana, much discussed by her brother, her two sisters, and the royal family, and the government. Prime Minister will participate.
We are gathered here in Westminster Abbey.
The Dean of Westminster.
Thanks for the life of Diana, Princess of Wales, to commend her soul to Almighty God, and to seek his comfort for all who mourn. We particularly pray for God's restoring peace and loving presence with her children, the Princes William and Harry, and all her family. In her life, Diana profoundly influenced this nation and the world. Although a princess, she was someone for whom, from afar, we dared to feel affection, and by whom we were all intrigued. She kept company with kings and queens, with princes and presidents. But especially we remember her humane concerns and how she met individuals and made them feel significant. In her death, she commands the sympathy of millions. Whatever our beliefs and faith, let us with thanksgiving remember her life and enjoyment of it. Let us rededicate to God the work of those many charities that she supported. Let us commit ourselves anew to caring for others. And let us offer to him and for his service our own mortality and vulnerability.
Many of you may recognize this first hymn. It was sung at Diana's wedding to Prince Charles. I vow to thee, my country. Prince William had asked for that hymn because it was his mother's favorite. The first reading by Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's eldest sister.
And leave you here a while. Be not like others, sore undone, who keep long vigils by the silent dust, and weep. For my sake, turn again to life and smile, nerving thy heart and trembling hand to do something to comfort other hearts than thine. Complete these dear unfinished tasks of mine, and I, perchance, may therein comfort you.
And now the BBC Singers by Lynn Dawson. Diana's favorite from Giuseppe Verdi. A reading by Lady Jane Fellows, Diana's older sister.
Time is too slow for those who wait, too swift for those who fear, too long for those who grieve, too short for those who rejoice. But for those who love, time is eternity.
And now the lesson will be read by the Right Honorable Tony Blair, the Prime Minister.
Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not love, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, and have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not love, it profiteth me nothing. Love suffereth long, and is kind. Love envieth not, love vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Love never faileth. But whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now, we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love.
Prime Minister Tony Blair. And now, Elton John. Candle in the Wind, written with words on this occasion for her.
Rose, may you ever grow in our hearts. You are the greatest place to sense where lives were torn apart. You called out to our country and you whispered to those in pain. Now you belong to heaven, and the stars spell out your name. And it seems to me you lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will. Loveliness we've lost, those empty days without your smile, this torch we'll always carry for our nation's golden child. Even though it joy you brought us through the years. And it seems to me you've lived your life like a candle at the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. The candles burned out long before your legend ever will. Goodbye, England's road. May you ever grow in our hearts. You were the greatest place to set where life was torn apart. Goodbye, English road, from a country lost without your soul, who missed the wings of your compassion more than you will ever know. And it seems to me you've lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will.
Outside Westminster Abbey, applause. Inside, a tribute to Diana from her brother, Earl Spencer.
I stand before you today, the representative of a family in grief, in a country in mourning, before a world in shock. We are all united, not only in our desire to pay our respects to Diana, but rather in our need to do so. For such was her extraordinary appeal, that the tens of millions of people taking part in this service all over the world, via television and radio, who never actually met her, feel that they too lost someone close to them in the early hours of Sunday morning. It is a more remarkable tribute to Diana than I can ever hope to offer her today. Diana was the very essence of compassion, of duty, of style, of beauty. All over the world, she was a symbol of selfless humanity, a standard bearer for the rights of the truly downtrodden, a very British girl who transcended nationality, someone with a natural nobility who was classless, and who proved in the last year that she needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic. Today is our chance to say thank you for the way you brightened our lives, even though God granted you but half a life. We will all feel cheated, always, that you were taken from us so young. And yet we must learn to be grateful that you came along at all. Only now you are gone do we truly appreciate what we are now without. And we want you to know that life without you is very, very difficult. We have all despaired at our loss over the past week, and only the strength of the message you gave us through your years of giving has afforded us the strength to move forward. There is a temptation to rush to canonize your memory. There is no need to do so. You stand tall enough as a human being of unique qualities, not to need to be seen as a saint. Indeed, to sanctify your memory would be to miss out on the very core of your being, your wonderfully mischievous sense of humor with a laugh that bent you double, your joy for life transmitted wherever you took your smile and the sparkle in those unforgettable eyes, your boundless energy which you could barely contain. But your greatest gift was your intuition, and it was a gift you used wisely. This is what underpinned all your other wonderful attributes. And if we look to analyze what it was about you that had such a wide appeal, we find it in your instinctive feel for what was really important in all our lives. Without your God-given sensitivity, we would be immersed in greater ignorance at the anguish of AIDS and HIV sufferers, the plight of the homeless, the isolation of lepers, the random destruction of landmines. Diana explained to me once that it was her innermost feelings of suffering that made it possible for her to connect with her constituency of the rejected. And here we come to another truth about her. For all the status, the glamour, the applause, Diana remained throughout a very insecure person at heart, almost childlike in her desire to do good for others, so she could release herself from deep feelings of unworthiness, of which her eating disorders were merely a symptom. The world sensed this part of her character and cherished her for her vulnerability, whilst admiring her for her honesty. The last time I saw Diana was on July the 1st, her birthday in London, when typically she was not taking time to celebrate her special day with friends, but was guest of honor at a fundraising charity evening. She sparkled, of course, but I would rather cherish the days I spent with her in March, when she came to visit me and my children in our home in South Africa. I am proud of the fact that, apart from when she was on public display meeting President Mandela, we managed to contrive to stop the ever-present paparazzi from getting a single picture of her. That meant a lot to her. These were days I will always treasure. It was as if we had been transported back to our childhood, when we spent such an enormous amount of time together, the two youngest in the family. Fundamentally, she hadn't changed at all from the big sister who mothered me as a baby, fought with me at school, and endured those long train journeys between our parents' homes with me at weekends. It is a tribute to her level-headedness and strength that despite the most bizarre life imaginable after her childhood, she remained intact, true to herself. There is no doubt that she was looking for a new direction in her life at this time. She talked endlessly of getting away from England, mainly because of the treatment that she received at the hands of the newspapers. I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media, why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down. It is baffling. My own and only explanation is that genuine goodness is threatening to those at the opposite end of the moral spectrum. It is a point to remember that of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this. A girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age. She would want us today to pledge ourselves to protecting her beloved boys, William and Harry, from a similar fate. And I do this here, Diana, on your behalf. We will not allow them to suffer the anguish that used regularly to drive you to tearful despair. And beyond that, on behalf of your mother and sisters, I pledge that we, your blood family, will do all we can to continue the imaginative and loving way in which you were steering these two exceptional young men, so that their souls are not simply immersed by duty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned. We fully respect the heritage into which they have both been born, and will always respect and encourage them in their royal role. But we, like you, recognize the need for them to experience as many different aspects of life as possible, to arm them spiritually and emotionally for the years ahead. I know you would have expected nothing less from us. William and Harry, we all care desperately for you today. We're all chewed up with sadness at the loss of a woman who wasn't even our mother. How great your suffering is, we cannot even imagine. I would like to end by thanking God for the small mercies he's shown us at this dreadful time, for taking Diana at her most beautiful and radiant, and when she had joy in her private life.
Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman I'm so proud to be able to call my sister. The unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.
We give thanks to God for Diana, Princess of Wales, for her sense of joy, and for the way she gave so much to so many people. Lord, we thank you for Diana, whose life touched us all, and for all those memories of her that we treasure. We give thanks for those qualities and strength that endeared her to us, for her vulnerability, for her radiant and vibrant personality, for her ability to communicate warmth and compassion, for her ringing laugh, and above all, for her readiness to identify with those less fortunate in our nation and the world. Lord of the loving, hear our prayer. We pray for those most closely affected by her death, for Prince William and Prince Harry, who mourn the passing of their dearly loved mother, for her family, especially for her mother, her brother, and her sisters. Lord, we thank you for the precious gift of family life, for all human relationships, and for the strength we draw from one another. Have compassion on those for whom this parting brings particular pain and the deepest sense of loss. Casting their cares on you, may they know the gentleness of your presence and the consolation of your love. Lord of the bereaved, hear our prayer. We pray for the members of the royal family, for wisdom and discernment as they discharge their responsibilities in the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, and the world. Lord, we commend to you Elizabeth, our Queen, the members of the royal family, and all who exercise power and authority in our nation. Enrich them with your grace, that we may be governed with wisdom and godliness, so that in love for you and service to each other, we may each bring our gifts to serve the common good. Lord of the nations, hear our prayer. Diana was not alone in losing her young life tragically. We remember too her friend Dodi Fayed and his family, Henri Paul, and all for whom today's service rekindles memories of grief untimely born. Lord, in certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life, we commend to you all who have lost loved ones in tragic circumstances. Give them comfort, renew their faith, and strengthen them in the weeks and months ahead. Lord of the broken-hearted, hear our prayer. The princess will be especially missed by the many charities with which she identified herself. We recall those precious images, the affectionate cuddle of children in hospital, her relationship with Mother Teresa, whose death we also remember today, that touch of the young man dying of AIDS, her compassion for those maimed through the evil of landmines, and many, many, many more. Lord, we pray for all who are weak, poor, and powerless in this country and throughout the world. The sick, among them Trevor Rees-Jones, the maimed, and all whose lives are damaged. We thank you for the way that Diana became a beacon of hope and a source of strength for so many. We commend to you all those charities that she supported. Strengthen the resolve of those who work for them to continue the good work begun with her. Lord of the suffering, hear our prayer. And now abideth faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love. As we reflect on the princess's compassion for others, We pray that we too may be inspired to serve as she served. Lord, we thank you for Diana's commitment to others. Give us the same compassion and commitment. Give us a steadfast heart, which no unworthy thought can drag down, an unconquered heart, which no tribulation can wear out, an upright heart, which no unworthy purpose can tempt aside. Grant us, O Lord, understanding to know you, diligence to seek you, wisdom to find you, and a faithfulness that may bring us to your eternal kingdom. Lord of the compassionate, hear our prayer. Therefore, confident in the love and mercy of God, holding a living faith in God's mighty resurrection power, we, the congregation here, those in the streets outside, and the millions around the world, join one another and the hosts of heaven as we say together in whatever language we may choose, the prayer which Jesus taught us, saying together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, that great shepherd of the sheep, make you perfect in every good work to do his will. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with you and all you love, now and forevermore. Amen.
Let us commend our sister Diana to the mercy of God, our Maker and Redeemer. Diana, our companion in faith and sister in Christ, we entrust you to God. Go forth from this world in the love of the Father who created you, in the mercy of Jesus Christ who died for you, in the power of the Holy Spirit who strengthens you. At one with all the faithful, living and departed, may you rest in peace and rise in glory, where grief and misery are banished, and light and joy evermore abide. Amen.
And with the stunning Alleluia by the British composer, the living British composer, John Tavener, this funeral service for Diana, the Princess of Wales, comes to an end. And now, with the enthusiastic support of the nation, there will be throughout the nation a minute's silence. The Dean of Westminster has said it for so many people. We were swept up in the emotion of it all. It's been very difficult for so many people this week to imagine Diana as actually having died, because all week we have seen scene upon scene, picture upon picture, circumstance upon circumstance of her life. But now her funeral at Westminster Abbey is over, and she goes now in this hearse 80 miles from here to Althorp, or Althorp as some people call it, where she will be interred on her family's property. She will go in this car along something of a reverse route, as she has just come on a gun carriage. And as she goes, you can hear the people applauding. Around Westminster Abbey, it is silent, save for the bells. Passing the National War Memorial in Whitehall, honoring Britain's dead from too many wars. She is headed to the county of Northamptonshire and a private burial with her family there. ABC's Jim Wooten has been there for the morning and is waiting for this hearse to arrive. Jim, if you can hear me, what has it been up like there this morning?
Well, there aren't a great many people gathered as of yet, because it will be several hours before the hearse and the procession arrives here in Northamptonshire, in this village called Harlestone. It's a tiny place. It oozes with old England. And along the roadway, although there are several people gathered here, families with their children, one woman was singing by herself the hymn, the closing hymn, at the gates to Althorp House. And here in this village, they do pronounce it Althorp. There are a couple of hundred people gathered, and along the way, perhaps a couple of hundred more. This is the closest point that cameras will be allowed by the police, who are politely but firmly refusing entrance, thereby honoring the wishes of Diana's family.
Thank you, Jim. We'll come back to you. And at Westminster Abbey, the Dean of Westminster, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who participated, say goodbye to the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, who are in the first instance returning to Buckingham Palace, and may, we do not know, ultimately return to Balmoral in Scotland, though one suspects that their traditional summer vacation is certainly over. And then from this church with its muffled bells, will come the curious and the devoted again, as the famous and the royal and the rich and the not famous, but the caring and connected to Diana, leave Westminster Abbey. 2,000 people participating in yet another historic occasion here. It oozes into the walls as so much before it has. While this simple hearse with no police escort as of yet retraces the step up Constitution Hill, round the Victoria Monument, back towards Hyde Park Corner, often called Speaker's Corner at the top end, where people so freely and openly express their political views. And then out across the West End and on to Northamptonshire. Aaron Brown is on the route. Aaron?
Peter, the scene here at Hyde Park is one of the most extraordinary things we've ever seen. People have moved back towards the route where the hearse will come. They have come from watching the funeral service on these giant TV screens. The police estimate 1 million people, perhaps a little bit less than that. But what a scene it was. Dead silence at points. Certainly thunderous applause when Elton John finished his song. Thunderous applause at other points. And I must tell you, Peter, from the moment I got here Sunday at Kensington Palace, to the children I talked to on Tuesday, to the 6 hours I spent at St. James with people on Thursday, again and again people said to us, we need to say goodbye to her. Well, I suggest to you that at Hyde Park today on those giant TV screens, they not only said goodbye, but for the first time, they really understood what goodbye meant, that this goodbye was final and forever.
We had exactly the same feeling here, I think, that with this service, one acknowledges what has not been widely acknowledged, that Diana is indeed dead. Have people around you been satisfied with the tone of the service? There was such an attempt to make it everything she'd wanted.
Yes, I think they were quite satisfied. I think they were, the Elton John song seemed so exactly right that one wonders now about the debate over that. Would now seem so long ago, but it was only a couple of days ago. And I think they found Princess Diana's brother's eulogy to be not just moving, but quite courageous, saying so many things that they were feeling too, and perhaps things that they didn't expect to hear today. I would suggest that yes, it was a quite satisfying, if sorrowful, experience.
Well, as the hearse moves further along now on the Mall, I think, let us move further along to Cynthia McFadden and get some reaction from you, Cynthia.
Well, Peter, the unofficial police estimate are just in the square outside Buckingham Palace where I'm standing, there are 100,000 people gathered. They stayed here during this service. It wasn't expected that there would be loudspeakers here as well, but there were. These people heard the service. Of course, they didn't see it on television. Let me give you a few snapshots, Peter. The police who have been shepherding the crowd, a wonderful relationship with the crowd. Several members of the police force came into the crowd taking small children who had flowers and took them up to the gates of Buckingham so that they could place them there. Several of the children curtsied as they placed the flowers there. People listened with their eyes closed for the most part to the service, especially those in the first 5 or 10 rows to the street, crying. The Queen is arriving, Peter. She's coming within eyesight. She's about 50 yards from where we are standing now. The crowd applauding. You can see them now, I think. Here they come. This is the hearse itself coming by. I don't know if you can hear the applause.
We can.
The Queen has re-entered the palace, and Peter, you will note that the Union Jack is still flying at half-mast over the palace. Peter, something I hadn't noted earlier, many of those in the crowd are wearing black ribbons to commemorate the princess's passing. Of course, no airplanes flew overhead during much of this service. It was absolutely still here outside Buckingham Palace. Many of those in the crowd, Peter, were saying that they were here and they wanted it known that they were here for the young princes, that they wanted to show by their presence their love of the young princesses and that the nation was behind them.
There will be, as both Aaron Brown and Cynthia have pointed out, considerable discussion about what the Earl, or what Earl Spencer said. But picking up on Cynthia there, he said of Harry and William that she, Diana, would want us today to pledge ourselves to protecting her beloved boys, William and Harry, from a similar fate. And I do this here, Diana, he said, on your behalf. We will not allow them, the two boys, to suffer the anguish that used regularly to drive you to tearful despair. And beyond that, he went on to say, on behalf of your mother and sisters, I pledge that we, your blood family, we'll do all we can to continue the imaginative, loving way in which you were steering these two exceptional young men, so that their souls are not simply immersed by beauty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned. Underneath the bells here, and I think, Andrew Morton, you may have to speak up a little more than usual. Pick up on that if you would. Or just before you do, another connection around the world is Sarajevo in Bosnia. Diana, of course, is deeply interested in the campaign to rid the world of landmines. And there is a home in Sarajevo, in fact, the home of Mirjeta Gamboric, a 15-year-old girl, landmine victim, who the princess had met during her most recent trip to Bosnia. Back to you, Andrew Morton, and then perhaps others, in fact, indeed others, on this remarks by Earl Spencer.
I think Earl Spencer's remarks were quite remarkable insofar as they summed up the mood of the nation. They summed up the fact that there's a hostility towards the media, who many people believe conspired to kill her. At the same time, there's a mood of hostility towards the royal family, for this sense of ousting her from their midst and driving her away. And the very fact that he's making clear that the old ways, the royal ways, will not be for William and Harry, is a signal very much for the future, very much that the royal family have got it wrong, very much that the press, the media, the TV have to get their houses in order for Prince William and Prince Harry to survive the next century.
He said at one point that she, Diana, needed no royal title to go on and continue to dispense her magic. That was, I thought, at least, also a shot at the family.
Very much so, and I noticed that outside Westminster Abbey there was spontaneous applause, and spontaneous applause all around from the screens. And there is this duality, the sense that the royal family have let down Diana, also a sense that Diana, the woman who the camera fell in love with, was eventually loved to death by the camera.
Barbara, some first thoughts on the ceremony from you?
Well, I think of what a friend told us yesterday, one of her very close friends. She said, I can hear Diana's voice. She was talking about the chapel, and she said she would never have believed all the flowers. She would never have believed that she was this loved. And when you see that hearse go by with the coffin and the flowers, so simple, the lilies and the roses placed by her two sons and by her brother, the simplicity of it and the love, because these were the people closest to her in her life. They don't know yet what they're going to do with these thousands and thousands of bouquets and notes that have been written. The Spencer family and Prince Charles and the sons will decide what happens with those notes. But one more thing, on the subject of what you talked about, Andrew, and what Earl Spencer talked about the press. I talked to an aide to the Prime Minister this morning, and he said that the tabloid editors here are very worried, that they know that they must totally change what they have been doing, and they don't know how to do it, and it will be an enormous change, and it's about time, probably. I understand that there will be no change in laws, and that the Prime Minister will shortly speak about that, but there will be talk about a new responsibility.
Well, the hearse has now picked up a police escort. In fact, the editors of the tabloids had originally been invited to come to this funeral today, because many of the editors had in fact had a fairly good relationship with Diana, but at the request of Earl Spencer, who himself has a very bad relationship with the popular press, they were disinvited and all gracefully retired. But Barbara, you and Andrew both pick on something which is impossible to miss, which is young Earl Spencer's talk. So let me go next to Anthony Holden, biographer, journalist in your day, Tony Holden. Still write a column for one of the popular newspapers. What was your take on what he had to say?
Well, Peter, I agree very much with Andrew. It was a remarkably outspoken address. He began the week very outspokenly, saying that newspaper editors had blood on their hands, and he's ended it equally so. I personally was pleased that he did not merely attack the media. I thought what he said about the media was fair enough, although those of us in it feel it's just some sections that should take the rap, not the entire lot. But I personally was very glad he did, in a very clever and delicate way, also make one or two sharp points about the royal family and what we were talking about a bit earlier, their treatment of Diana a year ago, the way they took her title away, said she didn't need a title to be who she was, and so on, and pledging those in what he very specifically called the blood family, pledging to bring Harry and William up, to continue to do so in the way that she would have wanted as much as the way the royals would have wanted. I think the whole nation needed to hear that. All the concern and all the feeling today is directed at those young men.
And the fact, as you point out, and Andrew Morton pointed out to me at the time, concentrating to some extent on her personality too, her insecurity, her deep insecurity, with which people here are particularly familiar. Sarah Bradford, I'm struck momentarily again by the fact that you wrote a biography of the Queen, who's lived in such a different age than Diana. What did you think about Earl Spencer?
Well, I thought it was extraordinarily courageous and honest speech, and I thought that he conveyed the personality of his sister and the reason why she appealed to the whole world in the way that she did extremely well. And it was a very untraditional, really modern speech, spoken straight from the heart, and I think that that moved everybody. I certainly take his point about the HRH decision, which I thought at the time was petty and unnecessary. Also, obviously, there's the media question. All I would say is that I do hope that after this moving farewell to this extraordinary woman, we can perhaps feel a little less bitter. We can find in our hearts to forgive. And I just hope that that's going to be the message of this ceremony.
Sarah Bradford, let me ask you this. We have heard all week, and again today, how much resentment there has been about Diana losing the title Her Royal Highness. Her brother says she needed no royal title to go on communicating her magic. What was the royal family or the royal establishment's view of her losing that title or taking it away from her?
Well, I think they were abiding by the spirit of the law. Once you were divorced, you're no longer a member of the royal family. But then they did muddy the waters by saying that she would be considered as a member of the royal family. So, as far as I'm concerned, you can't have it both ways, and I thought it was a mistake. And I think that all this ceremony today, draping the coffin with the royal standard, and the Queen's speech last night, is a very large effort to make amends for what was, in fact, a petty mistake.
When you wrote your biography of the Queen, you wrote, among other things, about the rumors that Prince Philip had reported infidelities during their marriage. We now live in an age when that is just so much more acceptable than it was in the early years of the Queen's reign. How do you think it's going to be now in the wake of Diana's death?
Well, I think we live in an age in which divorce is acceptable, but infidelity isn't necessarily. People don't mind perhaps if you marry several times, but they do mind if you cheat on your partner while you're still together. And I think that is a feature of the modern age. I don't think that we live anymore in the turn a blind eye, stiff upper lip era, which in the days when people believed in marriages lasting forever, you had to.
Now, Andrew Morton, I've asked you a couple of times, or at least you've noted a couple of times, the spontaneous response. Do you also think this was a healing funeral? Here you have both families together. Are we focused too much on Spencer, or is that what we'll remember?
I think we'll remember the Elton John song. I think the applause there and the tears there were genuine, the grief there was genuine. I think that we are seeing two eras here, two almost value systems. We have an old order, the kind of people that the royal family represent. They're the people who won the war. We were talking about that earlier. Then we have a modern generation, a generation that many women can understand and relate to, who show their feelings, who are far more modern about things. And so we've seen in this extraordinary service today a very profound sense of what Britain is today, how Britain is moving forward. An old era is passing, a new era is beginning. And the expression of grief is because the standard bearer of that new era was the Princess of Wales, Diana Spencer. And she is now passed, but the new era will continue.
You were very close to her. Do you now feel it's over?
I think that it will continue, and I think that many lessons will be learned. And I think that the new era is inevitable, because really the world has changed. The royal family haven't changed. Diana showed that. She was a symbol of that new value system that we now cleave to. But there's no turning back the clock, and I think the royal family recognise that.
Well, that's a good question, because, Barbara, you've been talking to some members of the inner circle over the last several days. Do you think that the royal family itself, or do you pick up that the family itself senses a need to be somehow different?
Oh, I think that they must, and certainly Prince Charles, ever since the accident, and it's hard to believe it's just 1 week, has certainly tried to change things, has talked to his mother, convinced her to make the speech that she made yesterday, and to come and be with the people. But you know, when Andrew was talking, it is the old and the new. One of the reasons that Prince Charles married Princess Diana was that she was so innocent. She was 19 years old, she was a virgin. It was very important that the heir to the throne marry a virgin. Had he been able to marry someone who perhaps was a little more sophisticated, a little more like him, maybe the marriage would have lasted. Had she been able to accept the fact, as other royalty had in the past, that the man she married was going to be king and could also be unfaithful, and the marriage would continue, the marriage then would have lasted. There have been all of these conflicts of the old and the new, and it will be interesting to see what happens when young Prince William grows up. How much tradition will be a part of it, and how much he will be able to follow his own heart and wishes and the modern life.
Barbara, you and I from the former colonies will matter a good deal less than what they think on these islands, and so let's go to Canada Gate outside Buckingham Palace, because Cynthia McFadden is talking to some of the people there. Cynthia.
Peter, of course, thousands of people thronging outside Buckingham Palace. Mr. Charlie Poland is here with me. Let me show you a picture of him first that he has brought here to Buckingham Palace today. Mr. Poland, photographed in 1993, was it?
That's right, yeah.
With
and
the
4th
Princess
of May, and she opened up an Epic Centre down at Labrador, which is an elderly people's integrated care system place down there.
Why did you come here today, Mr. Poland?
Well, I was here when they had the wedding, and I thought it was the most beautiful wedding I ever see in my life, and I didn't think it'd end like it did, right? But I thought myself, I must come up here today to see the passing of Princess Diana.
Were you angry with the Queen and the royal family's behavior up until now, or?
Well, I didn't used to bother too much about it, you know, but when Charlie got onto the television and spoke his piece to one of the presenters on the television, he opened his mouth and he spoke it for himself. And I feel that not only him, I think it's the people that knew what was going on with him and Camilla, that they didn't speak up before they went to win it. And I put it down to the church people should have stepped in and stopped the marriage, or wouldn't let it carry on, because they knew it was going on with Charles and Camilla. And I think that Princess Diana was ill-advised, really, but she was an innocent girl, she didn't know, you see. And
Can you forgive the royal family, Mr. Poland?
Well, I'm afraid I'll have to, really. I'll have to, because they're the end of the country at the moment, and I'm down there and looking at the wonderful place called Buckingham Palace.
Thank you, Mr. Poland. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia. Well, to be fair for people at home, Mr. Cohen is talking about a very famous interview that Prince Charles gave to Jonathan Dimbleby, in which there are two of them, two famous television interviews. One is Charles and one is Diana's. Charles came first. He said to Jonathan Dimbleby, revealed himself a great deal about his marriage, and did indeed admit on television that he had been unfaithful to his wife. Then Diana came along sometime later, and she admitted that she had been unfaithful to her husband on television. Andrew Morton, who was at this time you were writing the story of Diana's life from the absolute inside. I remember it, you know, once removed in the United States, we felt that you and we were living through this astonishing soap opera.
Well, yes, I mean, in many respects, Diana is an icon for the modern age. During the 1980s, when she first came into the royal family, she was seen as the dutiful mother, the dutiful wife, and she played second fiddle to her husband. And the 1980s, remember, was more of an era of go-getting, of me first kind of an age. Come the 1990s, she actually reveals herself. She reveals her vulnerability through the pages of Diana, her true story. And we see a different kind of a woman, reflecting a different kind of era. We've seen, to widen it out, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, and the world is a more hopeful place. Diana represented in some curious way the alchemy between individuals and events. Diana was our hope for the future, which is why our reaction is so intense.
Let's go back. Well, another reason it's so intense, of course, is that so many people met Diana. So many people have met the royal family in general have never forgotten that moment when they met some member of the royal family, whether it was the best or the least. You never forget it. Let's go back to Hyde Park and Aaron Brown.
Peter, we're with a number of people who watched the funeral on the giant screens here. Caroline, was it a satisfying experience for you?
It was very comforting.
Was there a part of it in particular that stands out?
I think Elton John's song summed it up for all of us.
You're doing fine. I can see your lip quivering a bit.
Very emotional.
It was a highly emotional experience, wasn't it? Was it for you also?
Yeah, very much so. Particularly the speech made by Diana's brother.
Was there a part of the speech that Diana's brother made that seemed to resonate in particular to you?
Yeah, there was. I can't remember the words now, but I was very moved by it.
There was in that speech, it was quite complex because there was some anger directed at the family, at the royal family, it seemed to me, at the media. Was it the kind of thing that you wanted him to say?
They are the kind of things that are so moving because it's from, I mean, there's so many people here who have never met her, and to hear those things from someone so close to her is important to hear.
Just one more question before I move on here. Does it help bring a closure, a sense now that we go on, we go forward? Caroline?
We've been able to pay our last respect, and that is what we wanted to come here to do today.
And does it seem more real to you now? Is it certain to you now?
Yes, it's final. It's happened. And although Princess Diana has gone now, I think through the things that she has done, we will be able to continue with the goodness that she's done, and the people will never forget her.
I know you're glad you came. It's been hard, though, hasn't it?
It has.
Just briefly, one more. Is it John?
Yes.
John, I'm sorry. John's an American who lives in Amsterdam. Tell me why you came over.
We came because I think Princess Diana is a world figure, and we all in the world have been touched by her, and we wanted to pay our respects and be with other people and share in the misery and being upset about losing such a wonderful person in the world. And we didn't feel that staying at home would have done it.
Thank you. Thank all of you for coming up. I know it's a difficult time. Peter?
Thanks, Aaron. That young American has come over from Amsterdam wearing a ribbon, which we're familiar in the United States. Of course, the original one was red, worn on behalf of people with AIDS. This is a black ribbon, which has been handed out in many parts of London today. It's a little unclear whether it has been to honor Diana or whether to honor Diana's work for AIDS, or whether it's to honor Diana in general and the work she has done for so many charities. But there's been a very clear emphasis here today in making so much of the good and open and outgoing and committed parts of her life to include all the charities to which she has stayed, particularly those she stayed close to after her divorce. Now, this hearse is not wandering aimlessly through the streets of London. Having had this quite magnificent funeral at Westminster Abbey, Diana's body is now on its way to the Spencer family home in the county of Northamptonshire. The flowers along the road put there, we said earlier today, if you hadn't joined us, that there is something of a genuine flower shortage in Britain, and you can see people throwing flowers out in the direction of the hearse. Everybody in this country this week, you've seen every second, every third person seems to have had a small handful of posies or tulips or whatever they could get their hands on in order to express their connection to Diana. And it has spread this emotion throughout the country, been spread by the media, been spread by word of mouth, been there in people's hearts without question. But here you see people having, as Aaron Brown found with one copy, an opportunity to say a last goodbye. Barbara?
Peter, there are 6 charities in particular that the princess stayed with after her divorce when she cut down her list. And one of the major ones is Great Ormond Street Hospital, which cares for sick children, and they're now talking about changing the name after Diana. There are cities, I understand, around the world which are going to change their names. The other charities are the National AIDS Trust, one that works with homeless, the Leprosy Mission, the English National Ballet. Princess Diana, I understand, and Andrew Morton, you would know most, when she was very young, said, I either want to be a ballet dancer or be married to the Prince of Wales. And then there is a hospital that cares for cancer sufferers. There has also been set up a memorial fund now. As a matter of fact, Elton John left or is leaving Westminster Abbey to go immediately to a recording studio and to record a new single of that song that he just did for Princess Diana, and all of the money from that will go to this memorial fund. There have been hundreds and hundreds of lines already opened so that people can send donations which will go to the major charities of Princess Diana. And the father of Dode Al-Fayed, who was, this week there was supposed to have been a big auction in New York of the clothes and all of the artifacts of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, another couple in history that will go down.
The contents of their house in Paris.
That's right. He owned their house, owns their house in Paris, and he was stripping it, and he was going to put everything up at auction. He still lives there on the top floors. Well, now he has announced that instead of giving all of this to what was going to be his favorite charities, everything from the auction, which has been postponed and which will go on, I guess, I'm sure at a later date, all of the proceeds from that are going to go to her memorial fund.
Crowds are remarkable, we're told. Everywhere they go, you can see where flowers have caught on the top of the hearse and on the bonnet of the hearse. Just in case you're joining us, you have missed the funeral for Diana, the Princess of Wales, at Westminster Abbey, but if you stay with us, we will play large portions of it before the morning is over. So if you're getting up as the time zones move into the west, you will have a chance to share and participate in what has been a remarkable morning here in London. Barbara Walters has just been talking about people's participation in a financial way. People are selling newspapers this week, promising to give a portion of the profits of memorial issues to the Princess's Trust. There's an enormous question as to who's going to administer it, but it's been very, very spontaneous giving so far, as this crowd has been so spontaneous. Mohammed Al-Fayed, one of Britain's most controversial characters, not British himself but Egyptian, offered the other day £5 million because he had heard there was going to be a hospital built in her name. It will be one way of measuring her the endurance or the enduring quotient of her legacy, Andrew, as to whether or not this thing keeps rolling. But as you look at the streets there today, I know you keep nudging me, and I know you're a friend, and you're a friend of court, so to speak, or of the Diana court. It's still quite stunning how spontaneous it's been.
I'm just staggered at the spontaneity of it. This is, I think, one of the features of this whole week, the spontaneous eruption of grief, of emotion, of outpouring of grief for Diana. And then after that, the spontaneous idea to have a memorial. And then the gentleman you've just been interviewing, the young man with the black ribbon on his lapel. That, again, is a sign, a spontaneous outpouring of emotion for Diana. Again, we see these flowers being thrown at the quarter. The spontaneous applause in Westminster Abbey after Earl Spencer gave his address. I've never seen that at any royal occasion ever, and least of all. It's very rare as a funeral that anybody ever applauds. It's wholly un-British.
Anthony Holden, your reaction to what you're seeing?
I think there's a lot of different things going on at once, Peter, and we've all been groping all week to define quite what it is. One thing that strikes me watching these pictures and having moved among the crowds all week is that Diana, in her curious way, was quite an anti-establishment figure. And many of the people who've turned out on the streets for her are people who perhaps belong to the minorities of British life, perhaps the people who feel marginalized, not looked after by the government, not looked after by the royal family, and they have a sense that Diana was very much their patron, and they've lost that. And the bulk of the people are behind them. And there's been a bit of a sea change going on here, as well as a very personal demonstration for Diana, as a private and a public person. There's a bit of a feeling that maybe we're moving out of that era when this country was run by those invisible toffs in tweeds who shoot grouse at weekends and don't run for elective office. You know that from your time here. Mr. Blair is a part of that feeling too. I have a very strong sense that you hook up this week with that week in May when New Labour got elected, and you find a different Britain that's finally, at last, leaving behind the Britain of empire. We haven't had an empire for 50 years, and moving forward into the 21st century as the Britain of Europe. And Diana will play a big part in that process, in death as in life.
Thank you, Tony. Don't go away. And perhaps the disappearance of Hong Kong this spring helped as well. But one thing that's helpful for Americans to understand, if you use Diana's own words on her behalf, she was not anti-royalty. After all, it is her son, William, who will become heir to the throne after her father went. In the famous interview in which she was very much cast as being anti the royal establishment, anti the mandarins, anti those members of the royal establishment who wished to curtail her activities, anti those who would not let her be as free as she allegedly wanted to be. She insisted that she was a deep believer in the royal family. And wherever the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, and Prince Edward and Prince Andrew, Charles' brothers, show up in the last couple of days, they have been welcomed, been greeted with affection, though, as everybody has made clear, in this week, nothing like the spontaneous outpouring that you see along this route for Diana. Cynthia McFadden.
Peter Jennings, I have a group of people here anxious to tell us why they came. A man who met Princess Diana when she came to visit him in a homeless shelter is here standing with me. What was your reaction to the funeral today, sir?
I thought that Diana should have had a lot more. She was respected by everybody, and she's a people's people. My own thoughts on it, the service was very good. And I've been building up since Sunday, since I heard about the death. I couldn't believe it, because I was in the shelter, and I got up in the morning, went down to get a cup of tea, and one of the workers says, "Diana's dead." I just looked at him, "Stop joking, it's not true." And then someone else came up and said, "Princess Diana's dead."
What will you remember about having met her? What will you remember her for?
She was straightforward. When she walked into the shelter, she turned around and she says, "Tonight I'm not a princess. My sons are not the two princes." She says, "I'm Diana. This is William, and this is Harry." And they'll always remain in my memories, because when they were sat playing cards and that, and chess, and Diana says to me, "Always remember one thing. You never look up, you never look down, you look straight ahead." And at that time, I was a very heavy drinker. And
Thank you. Thank you very much. Peter, we've lost our IFB contact with you, so I'll turn it back to you. Oh, and it's come back, miraculously. Peter, do you want to hear from a couple of Americans, or while we're here?
Of course.
Okay. A group of Americans here, some from Miami, from Colorado, from Dallas over here. Why did you come here? Why did you want to be here?
Well, I wanted to be here to pay respect, of course, to the princess. We were the same age, and it's really a privilege to be here and to share this with the English people.
Sir?
To pay my respects to the princess, and
we're about the same age, and I have two sons, and my heart goes out to Prince Harry and Prince William.
Sir, you're from Miami?
No, I'm from Colorado Springs. Yes, I just wanted to say one thing, that I think even God's going to shed a tear here today. If you look up at the clouds, you'll see that.
You're living now in Europe, but you're an American.
Yes, my husband's stationed at RAF Lakenheath, and I just need to come down for some closure because it was just so difficult to believe that this had happened.
Were you impressed with the way the English people, the way in which the crowds have responded today? I'm sure we've all been lots of crowds before. I've never experienced anything like it.
Yes, very impressed. Of course, there was a tremendous amount of respect, especially during the service. I was standing over on the other side, and hardly anybody said anything during the whole event.
You're from Texas?
Yes, Dallas.
And why did you come to Texas?
I couldn't think of any place else I'd rather be. Completely awestruck with the respect that the English people gave towards her, and my deepest regrets to the family.
Did you feel that the service was meaningful, was moving? I mean, did you?
Yeah, I'm about ready to cry right now. Yes.
Thank you all. Peter, a group of people came from Manchester, England down today, and they watched with us, actually, on our monitors. Of course, no one able to see the service here, weeping through the service. You came down from Manchester today. Tell me your reaction to the service.
Absolutely amazing. Really emotional, touching, and I think it was a funeral fit for a queen.
You're happy you're here today?
Oh, yeah, I was missed it the world.
Ma'am?
I thought it was very supportive. The crowd was very supportive to each other. We all valued the princess, and she'll be greatly missed.
Well, Peter, from here, there are thousands of people still milling around Buckingham Palace. People seem not to know quite where they're supposed to go now, what they're supposed to do now that the service is over. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. They do not, of course, have to go anywhere. It remains a very pleasant day in London, as that American gentleman pointed out, hardly threatened by the clouds at all, warm. Stay in Hyde Park, stay at Buckingham Palace. Barbara, tell us who's going to Althorp. The hearse is reaching the outskirts of town, but it's got 80 miles to go. Who will go up?
Well, the whole Spencer family is going, and the actual interment will be private. Prince Charles and William and Harry are going up there by train. The palace won't give the details because the interment is private. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh are going back to Balmoral, and the Prime Minister is going to join them this weekend, which is traditional. This was always the weekend that the Prime Minister visited the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, and early would have gone yesterday. So they are going back to what really is the family home. You know, Peter, there was all this conversation and controversy, we keep using that word, about why did they stay in Balmoral, why didn't they come back to Buckingham Palace? But that really is their home, and that is where they decided that Prince Harry and Prince William would be the most comfortable, the most happy during this really hideous week for them. Now, the Queen goes back there, Charles and the princes go to Althorp, and then back to Balmoral.
The Balmoral, which is, as Barbara points out, is the summer residence of the Scottish residence of the royal family, was also, the Queen said in her speech yesterday, a place where she, as the grandmother, not the Queen, but as the grandmother, felt they could secure Harry and Prince William best at a time of terrible trauma. And yet there was this persistent demand by the public and heavens knows by the media for Prince Charles and the two boys to make an appearance. And when they did yesterday come down to London, things began to change. There's the hearse on its way to the Spencer Chapel at the St. Mary the Virgin Church at Althorp, some say, or Althorp, some locals say. A connection for us in the United States because it includes up there, we have some lovely pictures of the estate. I'm not sure if you can see them now. The tomb of Lawrence Washington, who was the great-great-great-grandfather of George Washington, who was buried up there in 1616. And some of us either remember or have recently been told again that the Spencers were, of course, cousins of the Washington family. It's quite a stunning estate. Diana is going to be buried on a little island in this small lake, the Lady of the Lake, as somebody has already managed to point out in Camelot fashion. And Earl Spencer, speaking for the family, says that it will be open for some period of time every year so that people can come and pay their respects. There's real concern that this little part of Northamptonshire will become as Graceland became for Elvis Presley. And the Spencers are quite determined to do what they can to guard what privacy they have left. Once again, Elton John. Candle in the Wind, written with words on this occasion for her.
Rose, may you well grow in our hearts. You are the greatest place to sense where lives were torn apart. You called out to our country and you whispered to those in pain. Now you belong to heaven, and the stars spell out your name. And it seems to me you lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Your candles burned out long before your legend ever will. Loveliness we've lost, those empty days without your smile. This torch will always carry for our nation's golden child. Even though we try, the truth brings us to tears. All our words cannot express the joy you brought us through the years. And it seems to me you've lived your life like a candle in the wind, never fading with the sunset when the rain set in. And your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hills. Candles burned out long before your legend ever will. Goodbye, England's rose, may you ever